Detective James Miller, stood at the entrance of the old mansion, his keen eyes taking in every detail. The Victorian house loomed before him, its windows like dark eyes staring down at the crime scene. Yellow police tape fluttered in the evening breeze, marking off the property where wealthy businessman Robert Thompson had been found dead just hours ago. "What do we know so far?" Miller asked Officer Sarah Chen, who was flipping through her notepad. "Victim was discovered by the housekeeper at 7:30 this morning," Chen reported. "She came in for her regular cleaning and found him in his study, slumped over his desk. No signs of forced entry. Door was locked from the inside." Miller nodded slowly, processing the information. A locked room mystery, his favorite kind of case. Who had access to the house? 3 people besides the victim, Chen continued. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, his business partner, Mark Davis, and his daughter, Elizabeth Thompson. All had spare keys. Inside the study, everything was exactly as it had been found. Thompson's body had been removed, but the rest of the scene remained untouched. A half-empty cup of coffee sat on the desk beside a stack of business papers. The window was locked, and a thin layer of dust on the sill showed it hadn't been opened recently. Miller circled the room slowly, taking mental notes. Coffee cup caught his attention. There was a faint lipstick mark on the rim. Strange, considering Thompson lived alone. He picked up the business papers, merger documents, showing Thompson was planning to sell his company. Over the next few hours, Miller interviewed each suspect. Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, claimed she'd left at her usual time the previous evening, around 6 p.m. Mr. Thompson was fine then, working in his study as always. He barely looked up when I said goodbye. Mark Davis, the business partner, became agitated when questioned about the merger. "Sure, I knew about it. Robert was going to sell without consulting me after 20 years of partnership. But I was at a business dinner until midnight. You can check with the restaurant. Elizabeth Thompson, the victim's daughter, wore dark red lipstick that matched the mark on the coffee cup. I visited Dad last night," she admitted. "We argued about the company sale. He was cutting me out of my inheritance, replacing it with a small trust fund. But I left around 8 p.m., and he was very much alive. The medical examiner's report arrived. Cause of death was poison in the coffee, likely administered around 10 p.m. The door had been locked from the inside with a key." Miller returned to the scene that evening, his mind working through the puzzle. The key to the mystery lay in the timing, the coffee cup, and a detail everyone had overlooked. He gathered the suspects in the study. "Mr. Thompson's death wasn't a simple poisoning," Miller began. "It was an elaborate plan involving 2 people. Mrs. Reynolds, would you explain why you really stayed late last night?" The housekeeper paled. "I don't know what you mean." "You helped Mark Davis, didn't you? You made coffee for Mr. Thompson, as usual, but this time it contained poison provided by Davis. Then you left the spare key, where Elizabeth would find it when she visited." Davis jumped up. "That's ridiculous. Where is your proof?" "The proof is in the details," Miller continued. "The coffee cup had Elizabeth's lipstick mark, yes, but there was an older coffee ring beneath it, showing 2 cups had been used. Mrs. Reynolds made the poisoned coffee earlier, knowing Elizabeth would be blamed when she came to argue about the inheritance. Davis arranged this, knowing the merger would be cancelled upon Thompson's death." "And the locked door?" Elizabeth demanded, her voice shaking. "After you left at 8 p.m., Mrs. Reynolds returned with her key, making it appear the door was locked from the inside. A simple but clever trick. Faced with the evidence, Mrs. Reynolds broke down. She revealed how Davis had promised her a large payment to help frame Elizabeth. Bank records confirmed a recent transfer to her account. As Davis and Mrs. Reynolds were led away in handcuffs, Elizabeth turned to Miller. "How did you know it was them?" "The dust," Miller replied. There was a clear spot on the windowsill where Mrs. Reynolds had recently cleaned. Her habit of tidying, even during a crime, gave her away. That, and Davis's obvious motive to stop the merger. Sometimes, the simplest clues tell the biggest stories. The case of the locked room poisoning was solved, adding another success to Detective Miller's record. But as he walked away from the old mansion, he couldn't help but wonder about the next mystery waiting around the corner. In his line of work, there was always another puzzle to solve, another story to unravel. Elizabeth Thompson inherited her father's company after all, and the first thing she did was frame the partnership agreement that had caused so much trouble. It hung in her office as a reminder that the greatest mysteries often hide in plain sight, waiting for the right detective to unlock their secrets.